The large courtroom buzzed with activity as lawyers and clients waited for their cases to be called. Judge Kim sat high on his bench, his gray hair perfectly combed, his black robe pressed in neat. His reputation for punctuality and strict adherence to rules was well known throughout the legal community. Case number 347, the clerk announced. Lee Corporation vs. Riverdale Hospital. The lawyer for Lee Corporation stood. Ready for the plaintiff, Your Honor. And for the defendant? Judge Kim asked, looking around the courtroom. No one responded. Judge Kim frowned and checked his watch. It appears counsel for the defendant is late, he said, irritation clear in his voice. We'll proceed with other matters and return to this case when. The courtroom doors swung open. A woman hurried in, carrying a briefcase and several files. Her dark suit was slightly rumpled, and a few strands of hair had escaped her otherwise neat bun. I apologize for my tardiness, Your Honor, she said, moving quickly to the defense table. I'm Ms. Park, representing Riverdale Hospital. Judge Kim's frown deepened. Court begins at 9 a.m., Ms. Park. It is now 9:17. Do you have an explanation for keeping this court waiting? Ms. Park placed her files on the table. Yes, Your Honor. There was an elderly man who collapsed just outside the courthouse. I stopped to help until the paramedics arrived. A murmur went through the courtroom. Judge Kim tapped his gavel once. While your actions were commendable, Ms. Park, court schedules are not flexible based on good deeds performed on the way to proceedings. The court hereby fines you $500 for tardiness and contempt. Ms. Park's eyes widened. But Your Honor, this was an emergency situation. I have witnesses who can. The fine stands, Ms. Park, Judge Kim interrupted. Pay the clerk before you leave today. Now, are you prepared to proceed with your case, or shall we reschedule to allow you adequate time to collect yourself? The courtroom fell silent. Several lawyers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Ms. Park stood straight, her face composed despite the flush of color in her cheeks. I am prepared to proceed, Your Honor, she said evenly. The hearing continued for the next hour. Despite her late entrance, Ms. Park presented a strong defense for the hospital, citing precedents and offering clear rebuttals to the plaintiff's claims. Judge Kim, though still stiff in his interactions with her, could not find fault with her legal arguments. When the hearing concluded, Judge Kim scheduled the next court date. As people began to file out, Mr. Han, a veteran attorney, approached the bench. Your Honor, a word if I may? Judge Kim nodded. That was Dr. Park you just fined, Mr. Han said quietly. Doctor? Judge Kim raised an eyebrow. Yes. She has both a JD and a PhD in medical ethics. She's also the newly appointed head of the Bar Association. The announcement was made last week while you were at the judicial conference in Busan. Judge Kim's expression didn't change, but his grip on his gavel tightened slightly. The rules apply to everyone, Mr. Han. Position doesn't grant immunity from court procedures. Of course, Your Honor, Mr. Han replied. I just thought you should know who she is before the Bar Association meeting tomorrow. You'll be sitting at the same table. As Mr. Han walked away, Judge Kim watched Ms. Park, Dr. Park, gather her materials. She spoke softly with her client, a hospital administrator who nodded gratefully at whatever she was saying. Another attorney approached her, and she smiled warmly, showing no sign of the harsh treatment she'd just received. Judge Kim felt a twinge of unease. He had acted within his rights as judge, but something about the interaction now felt wrong. He recalled the genuine concern in her voice when she'd explained about the elderly man. Had he been too harsh? Too quick to judge? He shook the thought away. Rules were rules. Order had to be maintained. As Dr. Park walked toward the exit, she glanced back at the bench. Their eyes met briefly. Her gaze wasn't angry or resentful, just thoughtful, assessing. Then she nodded slightly and left the courtroom. Judge Kim suddenly felt certain that this wasn't the end of their interaction. Judge Kim adjusted his tie as he entered the grand ballroom of the Lotus Hotel. The annual legal conference was always a major event in the city, bringing together judges, lawyers, and legal scholars from across the country. Marble columns rose to a high ceiling where crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the gathering crowd. Judge Kim. Good to see you, said Mr. Lee, a fellow judge from the district court. Kim nodded and shook Lee's hand. How many people are expected tonight? Nearly 300. The Bar Association pulled out all the stops this year. Kim looked around at the finely dressed attendees, recognizing many familiar faces from courtrooms and legal functions. He grabbed a glass of water from a passing server and made his way to his assigned table near the front of the room. The conference director tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Dinner will be served shortly, after which we'll hear from our keynote speaker. Judge Kim settled into his chair, exchanging polite greetings with the other judges and attorneys at his table. The first course arrived, a delicate seafood appetizer that Kim barely tasted as he reviewed notes for the panel he would lead tomorrow. After dinner, the conference director returned to the podium. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for this evening. Her credentials are impressive, top of her class at Seoul National University Law School, a PhD in medical ethics, and 15 years of distinguished legal practice specializing in healthcare law. Last week, she became the youngest person ever to be appointed head of our Bar Association. Please welcome Dr. Park Min-ji. Applause filled the room. Judge Kim looked up from his notes, and his hand froze mid-clap. Walking confidently to the podium was the same woman he had found that very morning. Dr. Park wore an elegant navy blue dress, her hair now arranged in a sophisticated updo. She carried herself with quiet authority as she took the podium. Thank you for that kind introduction, she began. And thank you all for being here tonight. Our legal system faces many challenges, questions of access, fairness, and the human element of justice. Judge Kim felt heat rise in his collar. The human element of justice. Was she referring to their encounter? But her speech continued without any direct reference to the morning's events. Dr. Park spoke eloquently about the need for empathy in law, the importance of seeing beyond procedures to the people affected by legal decisions. Judge Kim found himself listening intently, impressed by her insights despite his discomfort. Rules matter, she said. But rules without compassion create a system that serves itself rather than the people it was designed to protect. When she finished, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Judge Kim stood too, clapping slowly, his mind racing. How could he not have recognized her name? How had he not known who she was? As people began to mingle again, Judge Kim considered leaving early. But before he could make his escape, Mr. Han appeared at his side. Quite a speaker, isn't she? Han said with a slight smile. Indeed, Judge Kim replied stiffly. I believe she's coming this way. Judge Kim turned to see Dr. Park approaching, stopping occasionally to shake hands with colleagues. When she reached them, she greeted Mr. Han warmly. Dr. Park, may I formally introduce Judge Kim? Han said. Her eyes met Kim's. There was recognition but no hostility in her gaze. We've met briefly, she said, extending her hand. Though I believe we didn't have a proper introduction in court this morning. Judge Kim shook her hand. Your speech was very thought-provoking, Dr. Park. Thank you, she replied. I believe strongly in what I said about compassion in our legal system. An awkward silence fell between them. The elderly man, Judge Kim finally said. The one who collapsed. Is he all right? Something softened in Dr. Park's expression. Yes. His name is Mr. Cho. It was a minor heart episode, but the paramedics said that quick action helped prevent something worse. Judge Kim nodded. That's good to hear. If you'll excuse me, Dr. Park said, I need to greet some other guests. As she walked away, Judge Kim felt a weight in his chest. In his 20 years on the bench, he had prided himself on upholding rules and procedures without exception. But now, watching Dr. Park move confidently through the crowd, he wondered if his rigid approach had sometimes missed something important. The Bar Association meeting tomorrow should be interesting, Mr. Han remarked. Judge Kim took a deep breath. Yes, he said quietly. I believe it will. Judge Kim couldn't sleep. His bedroom was perfectly quiet, the expensive blackout curtains blocking even the faintest city light, but rest wouldn't come. The digital clock on his nightstand showed 2:17 a.m. With a sigh, he sat up and turned on the lamp. Dr. Park's words from the conference kept replaying in his mind. Rules without compassion create a system that serves itself rather than the people it was designed to protect. He walked to his home office and opened his laptop. The screen glowed in the dark room as he logged into the court's case management system. For the next hour, he reviewed cases he had presided over in the past 6 months, paying special attention to instances where he had issued fines or sanctions. A pattern emerged that made him increasingly uncomfortable. Young attorneys, particularly women and minorities, received his harshest penalties for procedural violations. Lawyers from established firms with connections to his social circle seemed to receive more leniency, even for similar infractions. This can't be right, he muttered, rubbing his tired eyes. Judge Kim had always seen himself as fair and impartial. He prided himself on being tough but just. But the evidence on his screen told a different story. He thought of Dr. Park standing in his courtroom that morning, explaining about the elderly man who had collapsed. Had he even truly listened to her? Or had he already decided to fine her the moment she walked in late? Judge Kim closed his laptop and walked to the kitchen. As he made a cup of tea, he remembered his own early days as a lawyer. Once, 25 years ago, he had been late to court because his car broke down. The judge had listened to his explanation and given him a warning instead of a fine. Why didn't I extend the same courtesy to Dr. Park? He asked the empty kitchen. The next morning, with dark circles under his eyes, Judge Kim arrived at the courthouse early. Instead of going straight to his chambers, he stopped at the security desk. "Good morning, Mr. Choi," he said to the elderly security guard. Mr. Choi looked surprised. In 5 years, Judge Kim had never addressed him by name. "Good morning, Your Honor. I heard there was a medical incident outside the courthouse yesterday." "An elderly man?" "Yes, sir. Mr. Kong. He's been coming to watch court proceedings since his son became a lawyer." "Nice old gentleman. And someone stopped to help him?" Mr. Choi nodded. "A lawyer lady. Don't know her name, but she was real kind. Stayed with him until the ambulance came, even though she was due in court. Some people would have just walked by, you know?" Judge Kim nodded slowly. "Yes. Some would have." In his chambers, Judge Kim's assistant had left the day's schedule and several case files on his desk. On top was a note about the Bar Association meeting at noon. Meanwhile, across town, Dr. Park sat in her new office at the Bar Association headquarters. The view of the city skyline through the large windows would normally have pleased her, but this morning she was distracted. On her desk lay the receipt for the $500 fine she had paid the previous day. Next to it was a draft of new guidelines for courtroom conduct she planned to propose at today's meeting. Her encounter with Judge Kim had only strengthened her resolve to address the issue of rigidity in the courts. Her assistant knocked and entered. "Your car will be ready in 30 minutes for the meeting at the courthouse." "Thank you, Ji-ho." "Are you nervous about seeing Judge Kim again?" Ji-ho asked. Everyone in legal circles had already heard about the incident. Dr. Park considered the question carefully. "Not nervous," she finally said. "But I'm not sure what to expect either." "They say he never backs down," Ji-ho warned. "Everyone can change," Dr. Park replied. "The question is whether they want to." She picked up the phone and dialed. After a brief conversation, she hung up and smiled slightly. "Did you just call the hospital?" Ji-ho asked. Dr. Park nodded. "Mr. Kong is being discharged today. His son is picking him up." Her expression grew thoughtful. "You know, if I hadn't stopped to help him, I would have been on time to court. But I wouldn't change what I did." Ji-ho smiled. "That's why you were chosen to lead the Bar Association." As noon approached, both Judge Kim and Dr. Park prepared for their meeting, each wondering how their next encounter would unfold. Judge Kim tucked a folded check into his pocket. Dr. Park placed her guidelines in her briefcase. The courthouse clock struck 12 as their paths moved toward intersection once again. The large conference room on the third floor of the courthouse was already filling with members of the Bar Association. Judge Kim arrived early, choosing a seat at the far end of the long table where he could observe the entrance. His hands felt clammy as he arranged his notepad and pen in front of him. As senior members filed in, many nodded respectfully to Judge Kim, but few engaged him in conversation. His reputation for being strict and unapproachable had created a distance between him and his colleagues over the years. At precisely noon, Dr. Park entered the room. Conversations hushed briefly as members noticed the new head of the Bar Association. She greeted several people warmly, then moved toward the head of the table. Her eyes met Judge Kim's for a brief moment, and she gave a small, professional nod. "Before we begin with today's agenda," Dr. Park said once everyone was seated, "I'd like to propose we defer the first item until our next meeting. I have a pressing matter to attend to after our session and would prefer not to rush through important policy discussions." The members agreed, and the meeting proceeded efficiently under Dr. Park's leadership. Judge Kim found himself impressed by how she guided the discussion, ensuring every voice was heard while keeping the group focused. She demonstrated both authority and respect for others, qualities he had always valued but perhaps had expressed differently. As the meeting concluded, Judge Kim gathered his courage. While others were collecting their materials and engaging in casual conversation, he approached Dr. Park. "Dr. Park, might I have a word with you in private?" She looked up, a hint of surprise crossing her features. "Of course, Judge Kim. Would my temporary office here at the courthouse be suitable? Room 315. Yes, thank you." 10 minutes later, Judge Kim knocked on the door of room 315. "Come in," Dr. Park called. The small office was simple but comfortable. Dr. Park motioned toward a chair across from her desk. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me," Judge Kim began, his voice more hesitant than his usual courtroom tone. "Of course," she replied, her expression neutral. Judge Kim took a deep breath. "Dr. Park, I owe you an apology. My treatment of you in court yesterday was inappropriate." Dr. Park's eyebrows rose slightly, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "After learning who you are," Judge Kim stopped and shook his head. "No, that's not right. Your position shouldn't matter. Whether you're the head of the Bar Association or a first-year attorney, you deserve to be heard fairly." He reached into his pocket and removed the folded check. "I would like to return your fine. More importantly, I want you to know that I spent last night reviewing my recent rulings." He placed the check on her desk. "I discovered patterns in my behavior that I'm not proud of." Dr. Park looked at the check but didn't take it. "Judge Kim, this isn't about the money." "I know," he said quietly. "It's about fairness. About seeing the human beings behind the procedures." He paused. "Your speech last night affected me deeply." For the first time, Dr. Park's expression softened. "May I ask what prompted this reflection?" Many judges would simply maintain their position. Judge Kim considered the question. "Pride, perhaps. I've always believed myself to be fair. When I realized I wasn't living up to my own standards, I couldn't ignore it." Dr. Park nodded slowly. "Thank you for your honesty." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Dr. Park opened her briefcase and removed a document. "I've been working on a proposal," she said. "Guidelines for balancing procedural necessity with human consideration in our courts. I was planning to introduce it next month." She placed it on the desk. "I'd value your input." Judge Kim looked surprised. "You'd want my perspective? After how I treated you?" "Especially because of that," Dr. Park said. "You represent a viewpoint many in our system share. If we can find common ground between your appreciation for rules and my concern for compassion, we might create something truly balanced." Judge Kim picked up the document, feeling a strange mix of humility and purpose. "I would be honored to contribute." As he began to read the first page, Dr. Park added, "By the way, Mr. Kong, the elderly gentleman I stopped to help, was discharged from the hospital today. His son said he's already talking about coming back to watch court proceedings next week." Judge Kim looked up and, for the first time since they'd met, smiled genuinely. "Perhaps when he does, we could both thank him for creating the circumstances that led to this conversation." Dr. Park returned his smile. "I'd like that." Outside the window, sunlight broke through the clouds that had covered the city all morning. 6 months had passed since Judge Kim had found Dr. Park in his courtroom. The autumn leaves fell gently outside the large windows of Courtroom 7, where a crowd had gathered for a special session. The courtroom looked different now. The imposing bench where the judge sat had been lowered slightly. The witness stand had been redesigned to be less intimidating. Small changes, but they made the space feel more accessible. Judge Kim entered, wearing his black robes. The audience rose. Among them were lawyers, judges, law students, and members of the public. Mr. Kong, the elderly man whose medical emergency had started everything, sat in the front row with his son. "Please be seated," Judge Kim said, his voice firm but warmer than it had been 6 months ago. "Today we mark the official launch of the Judicial Fairness Initiative." He looked toward the side door as Dr. Park entered. She walked confidently to stand beside him. "Dr. Park and I have spent the past 6 months developing this program," Judge Kim continued. "What began as a personal disagreement has become something much more important." The audience chuckled lightly, as the story of their first encounter had become well known in legal circles. "Judge Kim is being modest," Dr. Park said with a small smile. "His willingness to examine his own practices and push for change has been remarkable." Over the past months, they had worked closely together. Their partnership had started with awkward meetings but had gradually evolved into mutual respect. They had interviewed dozens of people who had appeared in court: defendants, witnesses, lawyers, and court staff. They had studied how different judges handled similar situations. They had debated late into evenings about where to draw the line between necessary rules and unnecessary rigidity. "Our initiative has 3 main parts," Judge Kim explained. "First, new guidelines for judges on balancing procedural requirements with human circumstances. Second, training for court staff on creating a more welcoming environment. And third, a review system to identify patterns of bias in courtroom decisions." 8 judges have already implemented these changes in their courtrooms, Dr. Park added. "The results have been promising. Public trust in those courts has increased by 20%. Case resolutions are actually happening faster, not slower, despite more flexibility." From the audience, a hand raised. It belonged to Ms. Yoon, a young attorney who had once received a harsh penalty from Judge Kim for a minor paperwork error. "Ms. Yoon," Dr. Park acknowledged. "This all sounds good in theory," Ms. Yoon said, "but has there been real change in practice? Are judges truly approaching cases differently?" Judge Kim nodded. "A fair question. I can only speak for myself, but yes. I've learned that listening first doesn't undermine authority, it strengthens it." He paused. 3 months ago, a lawyer was late to my court because her child had been injured at school. In the past, I would have fined her automatically. Instead, I rescheduled the hearing for later that day. The case proceeded more smoothly because she could focus fully on her client's needs. Mr. Kong raised his hand next. "I'm just a regular citizen who likes to watch court," he said when acknowledged. "But I've noticed something different in Judge Kim's courtroom these past months. People seem less afraid." Judge Kim bowed slightly to the elderly man. "Fear has no place in justice," he said. "Respect, yes. Seriousness, yes. But not fear." After the presentation ended, people gathered in small groups to discuss the initiative. Judge Kim and Dr. Park stood near the doors, answering questions. "Did you ever imagine this would grow from that morning when you find me?" Dr. Park asked quietly during a lull. Judge Kim shook his head. "Never. I was too focused on maintaining order to see the opportunity for improvement. And I might have dismissed you as just another rigid judge," Dr. Park admitted. We both needed to look deeper. A law student approached them with questions, and they turned their attention to her. Across the room, other judges were examining the printed guidelines, some nodding in agreement, others debating specific points. As the event wound down, Judge Kim found himself standing next to Mr. Kong. "Thank you for coming today," Judge Kim said. The elderly man smiled. "My health problem caused a lot of good, it seems." Judge Kim nodded. Sometimes the most unexpected moments lead to the most important changes. Outside the courthouse, a sign had been installed next to the entrance: "Justice is a human process. Dignity and respect for all who enter here." It was a small thing, just words on a plaque. But to those who knew the story of Judge Kim and Dr. Park, it represented something powerful: the idea that strength can be found in admitting when you're wrong, and that true justice requires both firm principles and a compassionate heart.